announce.
Hello everybody, we're back. It's 2 weeks since we saw you. It's the infant feeding team at the John Radcliffe and it is the 5th of May already.
No, the 6th.
6th of May.
Today.
I've been watching the wrong date. So I did it for 2 days obviously, and so this is our questions and answers with the infant feeding team. We are delighted to be with you again this week. I'm Naomi and this is Alex, and there's a team of 4 or 5 of us, isn't there? Four midwives working.
4 midwives and an
And
MSW.
we've got a care assistant as well, and Hannah's just gone off on maternity leave, so there's 5 of us normally. So we work about 6 days a week in the hospital, and we are available by email, telephone, or that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emails and telephones, yeah. So
we're very available.
We're very available. So this session is for anything to do with feeding your baby or babies, and it's if you're giving bottles, if you're giving formula, if you're breastfeeding, anything at all. If you're weaning your babies, it's for young day-old babies. If you're pregnant, or if you've got a baby that is on solids, that's absolutely fine too. We'd love to have your questions. What we don't want is anything outside of infant feeding, because we might not be able to answer properly in the most up-to-date information. So don't ask us too much about scans and visiting and appointments and that sort of thing.
Although we can give the good news that our fathers can now come, or partners should I say,
yes.
can come to breastfeeding clinic, and we had our first partner at breastfeeding clinic 2 Thursdays ago, which was very exciting. First time in well over a year that we've had a partner at clinic.
And it's lovely to see the men popping up on the ward and having a conversation with them, and they can join in and feel that they're part of the care, because so many times you ask what your baby's called and they don't know because the dad's not seen the baby for long enough in COVID. It was really quite difficult. So it's absolutely lovely that they can visit for a bit longer now, and starting to just get a little peek of maybe some normality going on. Everyone's still in masks, and obviously all the COVID aware stuff, we're still in pinnies and gloves and all of that, and taking precautions like that, but you know, people are looking well, and things are looking up, so yeah, it's great news. It's really lovely, and the sun is shining at the moment, which is even better. So we would love to have some questions posted down there, please, and we will hopefully answer them as we can.
You can see all the names coming up, all the people's faces coming. It's
Lots of
lovely. It's
people.
nice to see
We've
that.
got a question already. Lovely, that's fantastic. So what we would talk about, we try and think of something topical, the things that are going on in the hospital at the moment, so what's on the street really, as to how things are developing. And the most significant thing I think that we've had in the last couple of weeks is lots and lots of postnatal readmissions. We've had so many mums and babies coming back that have lost excessive weight loss, or the babies have been very jaundiced. Sometimes it's because they're very premature, and it's a natural process. If your baby's not quite up to term, their livers can't cope, so they do get more jaundiced, but quite often it's been alongside weight loss. And so we're just trying to raise the awareness of it so that everybody is really proactive, because you know, we don't want you to come back in. We want you to stay. We want you to stay at home and feed your baby and make milk and be confident. And you know, somewhere along the line that's not happening at the moment, and we're seeing far too many mums coming back in with their babies. So how can we deal with that? You know, how do we look at that and support you so that you know what you should be doing in the early days? And one of the things that I think mums are really concerned about is giving their baby enough food in the early days. And I think that you know, there's an offer on the ward of donor breast milk in the early days, so that we protect exclusivity. So people think if they give their baby a little donor breast milk, it'll be fine. But actually, most babies don't need it unless it's medically indicated. And so, you know, if your baby's feeding in the early days, that's because it needs to, and it needs to prime the breasts and prime the prolactin receptors in your breast and your pituitary gland to actually stimulate the milk supply. And if you interfere with that, it drops the supply down, and you know, so you don't need to give your baby anything other than your colostrum in the early days when you're in hospital. So it's about learning how to hand express properly, and you doing it yourself and being really proactive and getting on it. So really early skin to skin, that's at the birth if you can, or as soon after the birth as you can make it. And also a breastfeed as soon after the birth as you can make it, and or hand express as soon after the birth as you can make it.
Makes all the difference.
So you can prime your breasts to start producing enough colostrum. And that's small, small, small amounts. And we talk about it all the time, don't we? I mean, you can go through Tommy's house as well. I rummage around and get a syringe.
So we know that, you know, when your baby's born, that the stomach might only be the size, or is only the size of the little cherry. So sometimes we lose our marbles, and we have a tiny weeny marble.
You lose our marbles, did you say?
Yeah, we lose them. We've lost them a long time ago. We use these marbles, and we show you. So a cherry or a very small marble. So it's a tiny, weeny amount. And the other thing to bear in mind is not only is your baby's stomach absolutely tiny, that colostrum is a food in concentrate. So a baby does not need big volumes of food. In fact, they don't want big volumes of food. When they're born, they're overloaded with fluids anyway. And if we give them too much fluids, their poor little kidneys and livers can't cope with it. So it's too much for them. So we don't give big volumes. That's why even when mothers are giving formula milk, we ask them to give small amounts, not big amounts. So think cherry. At least the first 24 hours, your baby's tummy is only the size of a cherry. So tiny weeny amounts, and I know Naomi's got a syringe out to talk about it.
So yeah, think about your breasts. They're not full. They haven't got milk in them for a reason. They've got colostrum, very, very small, very, very concentrated amounts, as Alex has said, of colostrum, and that's what they need. They don't need milk in your breast, so you don't have milk in your breast in the first few days for a reason.
Yeah.
The body doesn't need it, so why do we need to give it to them if they're not medically indicated? So if your baby's gestational diabetic, you know that you've been gestational diabetic, then your baby's blood sugar levels will be monitored. If your baby's small, so smaller than we would normally be the case, then they would check blood sugars and make sure the baby's got more fluids on board, more food on board. If your baby is premature, you will be offered more food in the early days to make sure that the blood sugars can be maintained. These babies don't necessarily have, certainly the little ones, don't have enough fat on their bodies to burn to create calories for the baby's brain. So babies burn fat when they're not feeding, and so they rely on either very small amounts, so your syringe here, and we talk about 0.1, we don't talk about 1 ml. Occasionally mums will get that in the early days and before they have their babies, but that very early colostral phase will be 0.1, or 0.15 or 0.2, but it won't be 1 ml. It could be, just one little notch on here, and that's a tiny amount, and that will start to come, and then as the days go on, it will increase, and you'll get more and more. And the volume should start to go up as the tummy size is going up, with the volumes going into it. But you shouldn't be getting loads. So, you imagine on day one, you're going to get tiny little bits. You don't need to fill that space. It's just that's how big it is. You don't need to fill it. That's, 0.1 of a ml of colostrum is absolutely phenomenal. And your baby only needs 3 of those in the first 24 hours, and then it starts to go up on day 1. So day 0 is the first 24 hours, and then after that day 1, it needs just a little bit more than that, maybe 4 or 5 feeds. And then by the time you get to day 2, so your baby's just over 48 hours old really, then you start to feed it about 8 times a day. Mm-hmm. Now if your baby, if it's not suckling at that point because it's had a medicated birth, you might have had an epidural or had some opioid injection, or very long labour, you might find that your baby's very sleepy in the first 48 hours and doesn't wake up easily. So you have to do the work for them by expressing your milk, and you shouldn't be asked to do it, you should just do it. You shouldn't be waiting for somebody to come along and say, have you done some hand expressing yet? You should be doing it. That's your role as a mother, to do that. So you should be hand expressing and be on it. Like yesterday, not tomorrow.
So always your way of putting it, yesterday,
got
not
to be
tomorrow.
on it. Because if you don't, you won't have the food to give your baby even when it's sleepy. And then when your baby starts to wake up in 48 hours, and it will grow horns at 8 o'clock at night, it'll be saying, where's the stimulation? What's happened? And you will be lacking in confidence. And the thing that happens then, if you don't feel that you've got enough and your baby's crying a lot because he's chasing the milk, your go-to will be to say, oh, I want to give my baby some more milk. And the easiest option is, safest is give your baby some donor breast milk on the ward, because it's not breaking exclusivity, your baby's not getting any formula, so it's okay. Actually, it probably isn't okay, because you're not going to stimulate your breasts as much if your baby's getting food that it doesn't need, because it'll go longer periods without stimulation. So if you do give DBM, you've got to then start to hand express more. You've got to be on it to keep that flow going, to keep the milk supply going. So your baby doesn't need extra food unless it's medically indicated. Be confident that this syringe will be enough in small notches to give your baby food in the first sort of 48 hours. So little bits, it's tiny, 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 and your baby will manage with that, and it will burn the fat. It's what we call ketogenesis. It burns the fat and creates calories from burning fat when it's not getting large volumes of food, which it doesn't need. And as long as it can do that and it's not interrupted, it will keep doing it until you start to get milk. And that the milk is there on day 3 for a reason. You don't need it before.
So I'm holding that back up again, because you can see the big difference that happens between day 0, day 1, 0, to day 3. So we've gone from a cherry, which is absolutely tiny, to have we got the third one in there?
Yeah.
To a walnut. So if you think about the size difference between a cherry and a walnut, that's quite a big difference. That's quite a small walnut.
But immature walnut.
So, but the thing is, the body is all clever. The body knows that this baby is now born, that it's now producing milk.
Yeah.
And the amount of milk goes up as long as you ask for it. So this is the whole thing about Naomi saying it needs to be yesterday, you can't wait till tomorrow, because actually you need to tell the body to make the milk. Your body does not waste energy doing things it does not need to do. So your body will conserve its energy if you're not asking for it. So milk doesn't just happen, you do have to ask for it. And that volume will increase as long as you ask for it. But if you're giving something else, the body doesn't know that. So if you're giving some donated breast milk because it's been made available, you need to be making up for that, because your body doesn't know that you've given that milk, therefore doesn't know that your baby needed that milk if they needed it. So you've got to keep telling the body, I need the milk that you're giving me, and more, and more, and more, and more, until you're in a full milk supply. And we assume that a woman will produce, on average, 750 mils a day. That's on average.
By day 10.
So some women will produce over a litre, and some women might produce a little bit less. But actually, on average, if you think of 750 mils as your target, you can see why we're looking at it going up from tiny, weeny amounts of 0.1 and 0.2 mils.
Tiny bit. So 3/4 of a litre.
Within a couple of weeks, you're sitting there with this wonderful milk supply, as long as you ask for it. We've got a ton of questions coming in.
So your body knows to make the milk, and it will come in, but if you haven't asked it to do it frequently, it won't know how much it needs to make. And that's the issue, is that by day 5, your milk will think that it does not need it if you haven't asked it. So when you then come to weigh your baby on day 5, the weight might be less than you want it to be, and that's when the tears start, because you've got to come back in, your baby needs to be given extra food, you start a cycle of pumping and feeding and topping up afterwards, and
it's hard work.
It's such hard work, and it's soul destroying to have to come back into hospital, particularly when partners aren't coming back in and staying with you, and they're off work for a set time, and you're away from them for the majority of their paternity leave. So it's really, really important that you understand that giving extra food in the first 48 hours is not helping anybody, particularly
if it's not your milk.
If it's not your milk, absolutely. Anything extra, so giving donor breast milk or formula that's not medically indicated is not helping your breast milk supply. And that could contribute to you not making it enough towards the day 5, 6, 7, so your baby then starts to lose weight. So it's really important that you understand not to mess with the normal physiological process of making milk and feeding your baby, so that you don't interfere with that and you make enough milk to feed your baby. So give your body every opportunity to do that, and don't interrupt it if you don't need to. Be reassured that your baby should be awake all night on the second night it's been born. It should be chasing the milk, and it should be feeding all the time, little and often, little and often, little and often. If you know that, then you will know that your baby is okay. And the other thing your baby does is produce something called antidiuretic hormone in the early days, certainly in the first 48 hours, which is what we produce at night, so we don't get up and pee all night. So your babies do the same, so they don't pee lots and lots in the early days to get dehydrated. So, it's self-preservation. Everything is set in place to work. So don't interfere with it, because it works beautifully if you don't. And you will be confident as a mother that you don't need to give any extra food. You will be undermined if you think you need to give extra food to your baby. You won't be confident, because you will think, I haven't got enough to go home, therefore I've got to get formula at home, because that's the only option you've got once you've given your baby extra food and it needs it constantly. So, you're then starting to interfere with your milk supply again by giving extra food when you get home as well, and that reduces your milk production even more. So really be on it and understand the physiology of it. Skin to skin, hand express, skin to skin, hand express. Feed your baby every hour if you need to, little tiny bits, because the more you hand express, the more you're going to make, and that will then set you up for success, not failure, and that's what you really need to do. Right.
Should we do some questions?
Yeah.
So, there's an abrupt stop there. Michelle has said, if my baby is cluster feeding, should I see an increase in soiled nappies? Well, not necessarily. So we're just looking for that. We always talk about what you're looking for is 2 yellow stools from day 4 onwards, minimum of a £2 coin, and 6 heavy wet nappies thereafter. So babies take on an amount of milk in a 24-hour period, and sometimes what babies will do when they cluster feed for a period is they might go a slightly longer period later. So overall in the 24-hour period you probably have in the region of 8 to 13 feeds, so I don't know that you'd necessarily see any more, but you don't want to see any less than 2 £2 coin size yellow stools on a daily basis from day 4 onwards, and 6 heavy wet nappies from day 6 onwards. And when we talk about heavy wet nappies, we're talking about a nappy that if you take a clean one from the packet and the one you've just removed, you can feel it. You can go, I can feel that's got water, that's got fluid in it. I can feel that's heavy. And if you can't, you're not sure, pop 2 tablespoons of water into the clean nappy and then compare. Do they feel the same? Rather than just relying on the blue line. But we actually have done a whole load of videos, and they're available now on our maternity website. So if you go onto OUH, maternity, and then feeding, infant feeding, you'll see a series of 7 videos, and one of them is how do I know my baby's getting enough food, and Naomi did a fantastic job of mocking up what the nappies look like, and you'll be able to see what we're looking for. So that's a really good way of looking and seeing, is your baby getting enough food, which is what this is, what this links to. So not necessarily, Michelle, you wouldn't necessarily.
What you might find is your baby feeds more frequently for one day, and then 2 days later you've got more milk in your breast, or you see wetter and dirtier nappies a couple of days later, and that's your baby stepping the volumes up, the production of milk up a little bit as their needs change. And they tend to do it every other day. You have a good day and you think, oh, that's great, I'll do this tomorrow, and then the next day that you can't get them off the breast, they just jump, feed, and then the next day you make more milk, and then so on. So it tends to be a pattern of every other day they feed more frequently. But it should be about 8 to 13 feeds in 24 hours. Yeah. And you might then see that they're more settled, or they have got dirty nappies a few days later, but you shouldn't see it that day necessarily, because milk production is slow. It takes 2 days to make change, and that's why people get fed up, because they don't see it instantly. But it takes a couple of days, and your baby is a self-regulator. It will step it up. So if the temperature goes up to 40 degrees outside, your baby will feed more frequently because it wants to have more fluids. And it will prepare your breasts for making more milk. As you drink more, your baby drinks more as well. And there's about 80% of water in breast milk, so they're increasing their fluid intake with increasing the milk production. So you don't need to give your baby anything else.
I was going to say that bit.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just going to get it in there. Babies, it doesn't matter where you live in the world, no matter how hot an environment you live in, a baby gets everything they need from breast milk. They don't need an additional water.
Yeah.
Alexandra has said, hi ladies, if we plan to breastfeed, is there anything we should take with while they're in labour to the hospital? If the milk won't come, what's going to happen then? So do you need to bring anything in? No, not really, but be prepared to go skin to skin. So we've talked many times about the importance of that uninterrupted skin to skin contact in the first at least hour after birth, and that means baby's put on you and doesn't move, not to be weighed, not to be anything, they just stay on you. And so actually it's really beneficial if prior to the baby arriving you get your bra off. A very, very simple thing to do, but it's amazing how many bras are still on when babies are born, and they do get in the way.
Don't be shy.
Get your bra off, be just in a t-shirt or a shirt or a front opening shirt or whatever, but be able to have your baby skin to skin, not on top of the bra, not on top of your t-shirt or whatever you're wearing. And and if you're going to be linked up to a drip, You know, get your bra off before the drip goes up, because, you know, actually you can't get it off then because it's linked over the tube that's gone into your hand. So you've got this bra hanging off. So, you know, think about maybe removing your bra. That's something you could definitely do. If you're being induced, you could be thinking about doing some hand expressing while you're being induced. So induction can take, well, how long is a piece of string? It can take such a different length depending on you and what's happening. So if you're being induced, then talk to the midwives that are caring for you and get them to give you a hand with hand expressing, because that can only help, and it can give you a bit of colostrum for once the baby arrives, and you can learn a fabulous new skill. So that would be all good things to do. And if your milk doesn't come in, you're going to be hand expressing, just like we've talked about. So we will encourage you.
Everyone will make milk until proven otherwise. We just assume physiologically that, you know, you've grown a baby and you've produced all the hormones for that. You're going to continue producing the hormones to make milk afterwards. But you have to do it, as we've just talked about endlessly. You've got to be on it. But we assume that everyone will make milk, but you're not going to fill a bucket up like that on day 0. That might happen on day 3 or 4, but you're not going to make it on day 0. But even that's
quite big, isn't it? I mean,
it's about
that holds 15 mils. I mean, that's a huge amount. We'd be delighted. You know, just a bit in the bottom, we'd be delighted with, actually. So.
You know, so don't expect large amounts, but you will have milk and colostrum to start with, and then your milk will come in on day 3 to 5, mostly day 3, but sometimes it's a bit later if you've had a cesarean or you know, you've been quite unwell, or you've lost a little bit more blood than you should have done, or had a blood transfusion. Sometimes it takes a bit longer for the hormone levels to catch up to produce larger volumes of milk. So you need to be on it. You have to feed your baby all the time. You know, you're more vulnerable if you've had a more complicated delivery than somebody who's had a water birth at home, because you've got lots of other things that have happened to you, and your baby's been medicated probably, so it's not going to respond in the same way as a baby that's not medicated, and that will reduce the amount of stimulation. So you've just got to be on it, even if you feel absolutely shattered. You can't stop.
Yeah.
So, you know, you get payback if you do it, and then you don't have to worry. And so in 2 weeks later, you will have the milk volumes you need, and it is time critical. You've got a 2-week window where that will shut. Those receptors shut down after 2 weeks, and so if you don't stimulate them properly in that early time, then nothing you do will make milk later than that. And it might be that it's 5 days for you, and it might be that it's 14 days for somebody else. We don't know how long your windows are going to be open for, so it's very time critical. So you've got to be on it in order to prime your breast to make it, because once you've got past that critical phase, that time critical phase, then you don't make milk. And we have many tears in clinics because women haven't done enough of that, because they didn't realise they had to. They were tired, they had drips in their hands, their baby was sleepy, they let their baby sleep 8 hours at night, and they didn't do anything because they were tired themselves, you know. And you've got to be proactive. You have got to make decisions as parents yourselves. You should not be told that you need to feed your baby. You should know that. You should know that you've got to wake your baby up frequently and feed it, and you should know that you've got to hand express frequently and give it to your baby. That is your job as a mother. And don't wait for somebody to come in the next day and ask you if you know how to feed your baby when it's day 3 and you haven't really done very much, because it will be no surprise if your baby comes back in if you haven't been on it. And this is what's happening. So it's your role as parents to make that decision. You get lots of information when you leave. There's lots of information on access for you to have, and you get support in the hospital. And what we say is for a reason, because you need to do it. So you know.
Get a care plan.
Oh yes, good idea. You know, you need to make those decisions yourself. It's the first day of the journey as parents, and it starts with this.
So this care plan is what you get when you've had your baby. And any of you who are watching, I know I can see some of the questions. I think there was one lady's just come on, so her baby's 4 days old. You've got a care plan like this. This is what you'll go home with from the hospital. It is written for you as well as for us. So for instance, on the front, it's got all the telephone numbers of all the local midwifery teams. So your team will probably be asterisked. It's to remind you that also there are 2 teams that are offering overnight care. There are 2 24-hour teams. Wallingford and Banbury both have people who work through the night. If you're having a wobble in the middle of the night and just want to talk through some feeding with them, give them a call, give them a shout. So that's this page on the front, it's got those telephone numbers. So Wallingford and Banbury, 24 hours. Then we've got the pages that have got all about your birth, which is very interesting to us. Again, a page about the birth. And then we do a checklist that's got about you and then your baby. And on that page, we ask you all about the poos and the wees. We've already talked about poos and wees. It's so crucial. It tells you so much. Go and watch that video with Naomi about the how do I know my baby's getting enough milk, because what's happening with poos and wees is telling you if your baby's getting enough food or not. We then have a page which we would love you to fill in, and it's actually headed "Congratulations on the birth of your baby," and it's a section that allows you to write in what time your baby has fed and how the feed went. Did the baby go on and feed really well? We give that a 4. Did the baby lick and not do much more? That's a 1. And how many poos and wees have you seen? And this allows you to log down. I know some of you will choose to do this on an app. This is quite useful for us from the point of view in the beginning, and it allows us to see what's happening, and it keeps you focused, because I can tell you now, your brain will be a bit of a fog in those early days, and if we say to you, how often is your baby fed, you're going to go, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And that's often the case. So actually bring a pen in. So the lady Alexandra said about what do you need? A pen's really helpful. Bring a pen in so that you can fill this in, so that you can, when we say to you, where did your baby last feed? Then you can go back and go and have a look and go, oh, the baby last fed X this time. And we could go, okay, well fine, perhaps baby needs another feed now. Or maybe if your baby's not awake, we could get you expressing. So this is really good to get a picture of what's going on. Then we watch you feeding, and we sign up here, assuming we're happy with how you're feeding. We teach you how to hand express, and if we need to put a plan in place, we do it here. And then this is the most fantastic checklist. So on this page, this coloured page, we can have a look at it, and you can look at it. Mums can do this themselves, and you go down it, and it'll be things like how many poos, how many wees, what does your nipple look like at the end of the feed, how often is your baby feeding, how do your breasts feel after the feed, and if you can tick everything into the green, you're doing a great job. If anything's in the yellow, you might need a bit of help. And this is a baby that's 72 hours or younger, and this is over. So it depends on the age, check it. But these are really there to help you. These are for you to fill in. So
you get this one too.
Yeah.
And that's got all the answers in it as well, plus poos and wee colours, how often, how many you should do.
Page 17.
How you store milk, how do you hand express. All the things that you need to know about breastfeeding, and how often to feed your baby, how often to pump, how often to do all of the things that we're talking about, and how to recognise when it's not happening. That is the backup as well. That's such an informative leaflet. You all get given that at your 36-week scan. You should pick it up when you go for your scan at the JR. And
if it's not offered to you, ask for it, because they've got copies in the scan departments.
Yeah.
If the person who's your sonographer doesn't remember to say to you, have you got one, ask for it.
So you can read that before, and then you get another one when you go home. So you will have another one to read when you go home if you mislay it. So, just that is your answers. That gives you everything that you need to know. There's no excuse for not feeding your baby regularly in the early days, because you've given lots of information and how to hand express. That's your emergency care. When you can't feed your baby, you must know how to do that. And make sure when you come into hospital, if no one offers to show you, which is unusual because normally you do get shown how to do it, ask somebody to show you, or to do it with you, to watch you doing it, so that they can make sure you're doing it correctly, so you can go home and give your baby some food. Don't just sit there and wait for people to come up to you. Ask them.
And we often hear that people say, well, the staff are so busy. They are busy, but they are there to help you. Do ask. Yeah. Press your buzzer. Ask for help.
I'd much rather you called them than you go home and come back and they see you 3 days later, and you've had to come back in, which is just so awful for you,
Yeah,
and
it's
just such a big procedure for you to come in and have all these things suddenly that you have to do, and it's like a real kickstart for you. And it's quite a shock sometimes, because you think you're doing okay, and actually, the baby's not getting enough. So it's your responsibility to not just sit there for 3 days and not do enough. You've got to be on it.
Right, so we move on to a question again. So Katie has said she's 40 weeks tomorrow, and she's got a planned C-section on Monday if the baby doesn't arrive, little girl, and so she doesn't arrive at the weekend. Her first was born at 33 weeks, and her milk just didn't come in properly. He was small and weak and just didn't have the energy. Can having another C-section rather than a natural birth make a difference with my milk production? Not necessarily, I would say. I mean, from the point of view of the fact that you've already had a baby and you've obviously stimulated a milk supply, and even if you didn't get as much as you hoped, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to impact this time. Every lactation is independent. There are some things that impact going forward, but we couldn't say at this stage, and as Naomi said a few moments ago, we always assume you'll produce enough milk for your baby. The fact that you have stimulated a supply before, even if it wasn't quite enough, is going to stand you in really good stead.
An experienced mother.
Yeah, and we know that when second time round, mums find that the milk comes in a bit sooner and it comes in a bit more, volume. So the likelihood is that actually you will do just fine. Maybe think about doing some hand expressing. Now you can go and have a look. Again, I've mentioned those videos on our website. So if you go on to OUH maternity feeding, and there's a link to a series of 7 videos, and we've got a hand expressing one on there. Go and brush up your hand expressing skills. Make sure you've got a little bit before your baby comes, and that you're on it when your baby does come, even if they're feeding, because that's like kick-starting your milk supply. Get your baby feeding, keep them skin to skin.
Skin to skin is the crucial bit in the first hour.
Yeah, especially, and I would put that on your birth plan. Make sure that whoever's looking after you, when you come in for your section, that you tell them, I want my baby to go to skin as soon as possible. And many of our obstetricians are putting babies skin to skin immediately at birth, even with a section. Do say that's what you want. Say, this is what I really want, because we know that makes the biggest difference.
Gives you a really big surge, so it's not your partner doing it, it's you that needs to do it to prime your prolactin levels to surge. And that, we know that if you don't do early skin to skin, that your milk production is a lot less. So if perhaps, when your baby was 33 weeks, you didn't have as much early skin to skin as somebody who had a term baby, because they were checking the baby over and all of those things. So it might be that it was just a little bit less time doing skin to skin that didn't quite trigger your milk production. It's as simple as that. So, the more skin to skin you do, the more likely you are to produce more milk later down the line.
And there's also an impact of having a baby at 33 weeks, because your breasts are actually not mature. Anyone who hasn't had a baby and been pregnant, their breasts are not mature. They only mature during pregnancy. So anyone who hasn't had a child still has, and sorry to folks for saying it, but it's considered to be an immature breast until you've had pregnancy. So having a baby at 33 weeks means that you have missed out on 7 weeks of breast development, whereas this time you've gone to term, and actually that makes a really big difference.
That's grown more.
Yeah.
And so your prolactin receptors are more prolific, and so you're more likely to make more milk later in the pregnancy, the later the pregnancy goes. So if you do have a premature baby, your breasts aren't fully matured. So it's nothing you've done wrong last time. It's nothing you've done wrong. It's circumstantial. And it sounds like you did really well, but this is a different pregnancy, as Alex said, so hopefully you'll produce lots of milk and be on it, just do lots of stimulation.
And skin to skin. So good luck, Katie, and maybe our paths will cross, but I hope for the right reasons. So we often, as I think we haven't said for a few weeks, is that if we see you, it's because you've got slightly more complex problems, so don't anticipate you're necessarily going to see us. Our staff are so well trained, they're all good at, they're all fantastic at doing breastfeeding support, so we only see those who have complex problems, so don't anticipate you'll necessarily see us on the wards, just to get that out there.
We don't see you.
For all the right reasons.
Because you shouldn't see us.
Yeah. Jasmine has said, how can I decrease the length of nighttime feedings? I feel my milk is a lot less at night, as my baby can spend a very long time at the breast with little swallowing. Oh, they're chilling, aren't they?
They love their mummy.
Yeah. They're
it's
all
frustrating,
chilled,
isn't it? Because you're
chilled
tired.
like you. Yeah.
You don't say how old your baby is.
No. Think about doing some compressions.
Yeah.
To increase the amount of milk a baby's getting at the breast.
Are you giving anything else to your baby in the evening? So you're not giving them a bottle of anything before they go to bed or anything like that? Just to make sure that it's exclusive and you're not dropping the stimulations in the daytime at all. Are you getting 8 feeds in 24 hours? Is your baby away from you when you're at work during the day and you're suckling your baby more at night and they're just enjoying being with you? Lots of reasons why, so probably a little bit more information. Just to see where you're at, and is your baby reaching its milestones is the other thing. Are they peeing and pooing normally, and are they gaining enough weight?
So you said about being a lot less at night. We know that it's quite common that women feel that they're much fuller in the morning, despite the fact they're fed through the night. That's really normal for women to feel like they have more milk, they feel fuller in the mornings, and that they don't feel so full in the evenings. But the thing to bear in mind is that when you don't feel so full and your baby's still feeding from the breast, what they're getting is really high fat milk. So the proportion of milk goes up in relation to how full or not full the breast is. So a very full breast will have less fat in it, and the feed. And then when you've got a baby that's feeding frequently and the breast is feeling less full, that baby is getting small volume, high fat feeds. So they're still really beneficial. But obviously you mentioned that your baby's spending a lot of time not swallowing, and obviously we want to keep your baby active at the breast when they are there as much as possible.
And how long have they been like that for? Is it all the time, or is it just recently that it started to happen?
So compressions is definitely something you can add in straight away. So compressions, you're brilliant at explaining compressions.
So pumping is going like that, and compression is actually holding and squeezing. So when your baby is feeding, so suck, 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 pause, you let go.
I move the camera
and then compress as your baby sucks again, and then it sucks the milk, and then as it stops suckling, you let go again. And then you compress, and as you see when you're compressing, you'll see that there's more milk going into your baby's mouth. You'll see that they start to glug a little bit more, and their eyes might open, and they may get a bit of more of a flow. But it also stimulates you to let down, so you get more letdowns in a feed if you're doing it, and that gives your baby more calories. This is a bit like giving your baby a top up. After, it's nature's way of giving your baby a top up, so that they get more food, and they actively feed more, so they nutritively feed. They're getting more food instead of nibbling. And that just pushes milk in and stimulates letdowns to give them a bit of a hit. And then you can also go to the other breast and let them suckle, and then start to compress on the other breast.
I'm just going to point out that we wouldn't have a hand right by the baby. It's because you've got to hold it. We could do with Velcro straps to put them on.
Yeah, so you're compressing. So your baby's suckling, and then stops suckling, and you let go. And then you compress because your baby's suckling again. And then as they stop, you let go. You can show with your hand underneath as well now. So yeah, the compression one. So bringing it in as far away from the baby's mouth. Far away from the chest, as close to the chest wall as you can go. Yeah. So you're not pulling it out of the baby's mouth when you're doing it. But also what happens is when you start doing compressions and your hands are too close, particularly as they stop sucking, they get really suspicious of what's going on. So you might need to hold it for a couple of rounds while they get used to it, and then you can let go. Yeah. But it's not that, okay? Because what you're trying to do is hold and push. So you're holding it to squish milk in. Now if you pump at all, you can do it when you're pumping, and you can then see that there's more milk comes out, and that you can then add the dots together and say, that's what I do when I compress and the baby's feeding. It's getting more milk. I can see it coming out of the ducts now. And you'll know where to put your hand. And you'll know where to put the hand. So you can see it if you're using a pump as well, that it has the same effect. And that's exactly what it's doing in your baby's mouth when the baby's suckling as well. And it's really good. They put on weight when you do this, if they're a bit slow. Right. So it does work. So much to remember, isn't there? Yeah. Right. So that was. So I hope that helps. So that was. Come back to us if you need to. That was for Jasmine. Oh, I think that camera's moved again. Excuse me. You're going to lose us. Yeah, I'll fall over. It's going to put the blue tap behind. It is disappearing. Okay. Right. I'll put something in a minute. So that was Jasmine's question. So good luck with that, Jasmine. Jenny, where would my first port of call be for feeding help in the first days, weeks of being home with the baby? I've never felt that the health visitors have very specific breastfeeding knowledge, not Oxfordshire, lived elsewhere for first baby. Your midwives are your first people. I'm just going to put something in behind this to stop it tipping. It's tipping today. Yeah, your midwives are looking after you for the first 10 days to 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what your needs are medically, and they should be able to help you breastfeed. So if you sort of make sure your baby's ready for a feed when you know they're coming, because now they don't. Back in the day, when I was a community midwife, in the old days, you used to have to wait in all day for the midwife, and you didn't know what time she was coming. She just turned up on her rounds, and that was that. But now you get specific times where you either come in to have your baby checked, or your midwife will come to you occasionally at home. So you tend to know what time they're coming. So try and time your feed with your midwife visit, because then you can have some help breastfeeding at the same time if your baby's hungry, and that will, really help you if you're struggling. So make sure you time that with them. So they're your first people
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
go to. And then your health visitor as well, and some health visitors do lots of breastfeeding and some don't do so much.
But the whole of the
They
breastfeeding...
know how to support you if they can't help you, they'll put you in touch with somebody who can.
But the health visiting team here in Oxfordshire are what's called baby friendly accredited, which is what we're working towards as well. But they're a fully accredited health visiting team, so they have got the skills to help with feeding. And if your particular health visitor feels less comfortable, you could just say, is there someone else I can talk to? And I'm really sorry about the drilling. So we keep having building work here. So,
and then there's charitable support. So there's the Oxfordshire Breastfeeding Support, and there's La Leche League, the NCT. They all have helplines, they all have support that they can give you via telephone. None of them are seeing anyone face to face at the moment, but I think that will change eventually.
Abingdon Baby Cafe, Sue Richards, and there's us. So we run breastfeeding clinics, so depending on what your situation is, if you ring us, we will have a chat on the phone, find out what's happening with feeding, and we will signpost you to any of those organisations that we just talked about, whether it's your midwife, your health visitor, or one of these organisations, or if we think it's appropriate, we bring you into our breastfeeding clinic. We're booking at the moment back up to the 20th, I think, of May. So we are booking more than a week in advance. If that's 2 weeks away, isn't it? So we do get very busy because we don't have a huge amount of appointments.
We've got slightly reduced clinics running still because of COVID. So we're not back up to full capacity with our clinics anymore at the moment, and that hopefully will gradually be eased back. But so we have got limited clinics at the moment. But there's lots of places you can go to. We tend to be more sort of complex things that have been seen by your midwife first, and they may email us and suggest that you ring us so that you come along to us if things aren't going as well, so your baby's not gaining as much weight, or your milk supply is a little bit low, something like that.
Okay, so good luck with that, Jenny, but just access the help and
make sure you ask for help.
Ask for it. Yeah, it's really important. Right, Lorna has written, her baby's 4 days old, who's latching okay, but we both now seem to be struggling, especially at night. Doesn't hurt when he does latch. I had lots of hand express colostrum before I went to hospital, which we have now used. I was advised to pump my colostrum in hospital because I had so much. When I'm pumping 60 to 90 mils, when your baby's not going to go hungry.
No.
The midwife came yesterday and said I should be topping him up with 10 to 15 after each feed if he does 10 minutes each breast. I just feel he's getting used to the syringes as I'm making it easier for him by giving him them. Do you have any advice? Thank you. I've been watching these videos for months and they're amazing. Oh, thank you very much.
Well done you.
Well done, Lorna, for getting that amazing milk supply.
Yeah.
And I think it's a case of seeing if you can get them to come out and to see what's happening with the feeding again. So get the support with the feeding. Because if you've got that milk, then your baby, your baby's extremely lucky that you've got that wonderful milk supply, and really you don't want to have to be pumping. Actually, a baby can get all they need in 10 minutes if they're on well. So it depends really what's happening with your baby. If your baby is pooing and weeing appropriate to age and gaining weight, then actually if you've got that much milk, your baby may do all they need in 10 minutes. But we need to know that all the other signs are right.
So don't say look at the clock necessarily when you're feeding.
No.
Look at all pumping. Look at the flow in your breast. Look how your baby's suckling and swallowing. And if they come off and they look well fed and you can't get them to feed on the other side, then that's enough. But if always offer the other side, and it might be that it's 20 minutes, or it might be 30 minutes, or it might be 40 minutes, or it might be 5 minutes. But that bit, your baby will take what it needs and how it needs it. And pumping is the same. You look at the flow when you're pumping, you don't look at the clock. So don't ever pump for 10 minutes on each side because you might miss out on draining your breast really well. Or you might not have anything else there and you're trying to get something out that's not there. So look at the flow, and when the flow slows, change the vacuum a little bit, wait a few minutes and turn it back up, and repeat that about 4 times. But don't keep a pump on. Just keep pumping on because somebody said pump for 20 minutes, because that's not necessarily beneficial for you. So look at what's happening, and if you're not sure, ring us up, or look on our videos. We've got a thing about how to pump on our videos on our website as well that we keep talking about.
Lorna, you mentioned that the midwife suggested topping up 10 to 15 mils for each feed. Was there a question is, was there a reason that she felt that was needed? You said your baby's day 4. Has your baby already got yellow stools? I mean, if your baby's got yellow stools, then maybe they don't need topping up. If they were still changing or bowels not open, then yes, the baby would need topping up. So it's very much a case of the situation that you're in. And the other thing I did pick up on here is you talking about syringes. Once we've got mature milk, so once the milk is lighter in colour than colostrum, more of it, and thinner in consistency, so it's runny, then actually we don't really use syringes. We would be using either cup feeding, finger feeding or bottle feeding. So we wouldn't use a syringe at this stage. There's too much of a risk of the baby inhaling the milk rather than swallowing it. So we tend to move away from syringes as soon as you've got what we call mature milk.
It's just runny on their tongue, so they can't, whereas the colostrum coats the tongue. If the milk's runny in their mouth and they're not sucking, so they're placid and they're not doing anything, if they're not sucking at all, then they could cry and breathe it in. So you don't want it sitting in their mouth not doing anything, whereas the colostrum will just line the tongue and it's thick and very, very small amounts. But when it's runny, they can just, it can pool in their mouth and they can breathe it in and aspirate it. So they need to be actually suckling in order to swallow that milk. They have to be able to take the milk from the front of their tongue to the back of their tongue safely. And that comes with tongue movement. And if their tongue's not doing that suckling action, the risk is it will sit in its mouth and it won't swallow it.
Just going back to give you hope though, you said that your baby had been feeding well. Actually, the fact that your baby has fed well is really fantastic. Even if you go through, and many women and babies find that they have a day or two that their baby doesn't feed as well, the fact that your baby's done it already, they know what to do, you will get it back. So, be positive about this, it will get better, but access help, Lorna. Ask your community midwives, can we give you a hand? And have a conversation about why the top-ups were needed. Just check that, because if you're pumping off those sort of volumes, your baby could be getting good volumes at the breast if they're feeding well. And even if it's a 10-minute feed, that might be enough for your baby. So rather than going on time. You need to add on that? No?
I don't think so. No, it's
Right.
frustrating, isn't it? And I think the thing is that you've got all that milk. The other thing to remember is that your breast changes texture when your milk comes in. So your breast is very soft in the first 2 or 3 days, and then suddenly your milk comes in and the breast becomes really quite firm. And babies don't like change, so they're not used to that fullness, and they sometimes won't attach in those few days when the milk comes in, and then they get softer again. So you might just need to take a little bit off your breast in order to get your baby to feed well. Sometimes something like a hacker is good, isn't it? The little suction things.
A bit of hand expressing.
Or a bit of hand expressing when you've got that skill already. You can soften the nipple around, the areola around the nipple, and that makes the breast a little bit softer for your baby to attach to. And that might be all it is as well, that if the feeding's not going as well suddenly, it's because your breasts are really full and they don't know what's happening. They soon will.
Good luck with that, Lorna, and keep in touch if you need further support. Do give us a
help.
shout. Yeah, we'll give your community midwives first. Katie has said, will a C-section mean an interruption to skin to skin? And we mentioned it earlier actually, that actually in some cases it does. It depends on the circumstances. If there's any concerns about your baby would go straight to the resuscitator and be checked over, make sure they're breathing well before they come back to you. If things are all calm and going well, then actually very many of our obstetricians will put the baby skin to skin at birth and leave the cord pulsating, so the baby gets additional blood. So it really depends on the situation of your C-section. If you know you're having a C-section, you know you're going to have it, it's an elective one, then put it in your care plan, your birth plan, put it in there that I want uninterrupted skin to skin when my baby's born, so that they know to put the baby in, they will work there, really hard to ensure that happens. So and just make that sure that's what they know that's what you want. The trouble can be when baby mums are being transferred from the bed that they're on for the section into the bed that they're going to be in for recovery. So sometimes that can be quite challenging to get the mother to move the mother without removing the baby. So sometimes that will mean the baby gets taken away for a minute or two and then put back. But normally it can be done.
It's quite hard though, because you feel really quite yucky after you've had a cesarean, and you might be a bit shaky, and you know, you're lying flat and you're feeling very numb from the chest down and you can't breathe very well and you feel a bit sick and you're cold, it's really tempting not to do it, because it's just one more thing that you've got to coordinate when you're feeling so, you know, rotten. So do what you can. I think that's the important thing, and do the skin to skin as soon as you can afterwards. So once you get round to the observation ward and they've moved you around, then have uninterrupted skin to skin there. You know, put your baby really close to you, and you'll feel a bit safer in a bit of a bigger bed. And you know, your partner could do some skin to skin at that point, so that the baby's getting lots of warmth and everything. If you can't do it, and then do it as soon as you can. Because you know, it's really important that you get on it.
So I hope that helps, Katie. Maria has said, if the baby's very sleepy, should I wake the baby to feed or hand express to give them it later when they're awake?
How old's your baby?
Doesn't say.
So if it's early days, the more you give the better, and your baby will be quite sleepy in the early days, particularly if you've had an instrumental delivery. But you shouldn't really, it depends on your circumstance. If your baby's gaining lots of weight and it's pooing and peeing normally, and you know, you've got loads of milk, we say don't go more than 6 hours if that happens, but you know, you don't want to be doing that very often because your baby will miss out on food. You know, they should be getting 8 to 13 feeds in 24 hours, so we generally say no more than 3 hours in the first few weeks, and then they get a little pattern going where they may have a time when they sleep a bit longer. But you know, 6 hours is quite extreme, but it should be that, you know, no more than 3 hours between feeds, until you know that your baby's getting enough and it's pooing and peeing normally and it's weighing normal weights and things like that, and then you can be a bit more relaxed. But until you know what your baby's doing, you should be on it really, because it goes back to milk production. If you don't stimulate very much, you're not going to make very much. So the more you stimulate, even if your baby's not waking up, if you're stimulating all the time, you can just give little tiny bits, 0.1 mil in this, you know, in the syringe, this tiny little bit. You can pop it into your baby's cheek while they're sleeping, and they can just coat their tongue with it and absorb the calories from it. So, you know, frequent. Just because your baby's sleepy, you can still give it food in the early days. But if it's more than that, then we need to know why your baby is so sleepy, and you're having to, you know, it's not waking up for feeds if it's older than a few days old.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Telia says, should I bring colostrum syringes in when I'm in labour? I have been expressing since 37 weeks and now 40 weeks. We've got 8 mils so far, well done. Would it be beneficial to bring them in with me, or am I better off just continue to hand express when the baby is not feeding? How often would you recommend hand expressing and feeding in the first 24 hours after birth? Sorry if this is a silly question, this is my first baby.
Brilliant
Not
questions.
A silly question at
Brilliant
all.
questions.
And I think we would err on saying, if you can, leave the colostrum at home, and only get your partner to bring it in if you need it. Because anything you do before you have your baby, although is a lovely buffer for when your baby arrives, is not going to impact on your milk supply. So getting milk supply driven, you know, we've talked about the importance of removing milk in those early days. If your baby is not rousing to feed and you're giving them the colostrum you've expressed before you've had the baby, that does not impact on your supply, and the body doesn't know that. So you much better to be expressing again, and obviously you've got that skill now, so it would be get expressing, and if you need more than you're able to get off, then you would use the express that you've got at home. But you've obviously got that skill, which is fantastic.
Do it in labour.
Yeah.
Do your hand expressing in labour, so you've got some for when you've just had your baby on top of the bits you're going to do. You've got a little bit extra for when you're doing it, but it doesn't stop you from hand expressing, as Alex said. You just keep doing it, even if you've got lots, you keep doing it.
The risk we have is that people who have had, you know, collected in it, we've met mothers who've done this, who've collected colostrum before they've had the baby, done a fantastic job. They've then given that colostrum when the baby was born because they weren't attaching, they weren't waking for feeds, and they haven't stimulated their breasts. And because the stimulation is driven by milk removal from birth onwards, they then haven't had enough milk. And we can't get it back then. So this is why it's so important, even if you've got a lovely stash, that you ensure you have frequent and effective milk removal from birth onwards, regardless of how much colostrum you already have prior to the birth.
And the hand expressing doesn't make more milk. It doesn't prepare your breast to make more milk. It just gives you better skill. so it doesn't impact it, as Alex has said. But
if you haven't done it
if you
before.
do lots of hand expressing when you haven't had your baby, it's not going to change the amount of milk you make later. All it does is secure your skill, which might mean that you get more out because you know what you're doing. But it doesn't mean that you're going to make more milk. So if you choose not to do it before you have your baby, it's not going to impact your milk supply afterwards, other than the fact that you haven't learned how to do it. And that's quite significant when you're tired and perhaps sore after you've had your baby. So it is a good thing to do, to learn how to do it, if nothing else. But you don't need to have that colostrum to make milk.
Right, all the best with that to you. Well done for collecting all that colostrum.
That's great.
Rebecca has said, big thank you for these sessions. Baby is 7 weeks old, breastfeeding well. I think a good latch. Midwife and health visitor. Oops, it's scooted down. Midwife and health visitor have had a look for me. Gaining lots of weight, many wet and dirty nappies. Since week 6, nipples have become very sore. Was okay before then, during and after feeds. Health visitor thought thrush, but GP was dismissive. Could it be the latch? It could be. What we often find is babies that we don't allow for the baby to grow, and I know I've said this a few times on these sessions, but we don't allow for that baby to grow. So you've held your baby in front of you like this, and you've now got a baby that's this size, but you're still holding them bang slap in front of you, and actually what you need to do is bring them round. So we always talk about holding a baby in close, following the contours of your body. So that baby is going to be, as Naomi described it, more like a set of bagpipes, because that baby is going to come with a stand. That baby, rather than being here, is going to be coming round, and you're going to find you're going to get more and more baby coming round you. So we haven't got. We used to have a small doll as well that we could show you. So if you imagine your baby's there, and as the baby gets bigger, the head still stays here. It doesn't come further over that way. It stays here because you're going to start nose to nipple, if you remember, and then when the head goes back, it's upper lip to nipple. You're going to start like that, but all that extra length is going round you. And you're going to end up with this baby wrapped round you.
Into the contours.
Yeah, literally tucked in and coming round. Yeah, so that your arms nicely tucked on top of them. So it may
and their mouth gets bigger.
Yes. No.
So the cavity's bigger as well.
So yes, so thinking about giving that baby, keeping that baby nose to nipple when you start. So that nose to nipple, regardless of how big the baby is. It could be a toddler, a walking toddler. The head is still here. So yeah, Naomi's going to show you the picture.
Have we got a nose to nipple? There's the nose to nipple.
Yeah.
That's your nose to nipple. That principle is applied whichever gestation or age your baby is. It's the same whatever you're doing. And that's really important that, as Alex said, that you line that up each time so that your baby can do that when it lifts its head back and it's still in the same place. So you've got to move your baby to get that right. And then you'll get your baby in the right place.
And this is whether this baby's a 1 day old baby, a 1 month old baby, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever. They're still going to start nose opposite nipple, head goes back, upper lip to nipple. Yeah. So think about maybe shifting. That's the usual reason that we find that a baby now starts to feel, makes you feel sore when things have been going well. Obviously, there is always a chance that it could be thrush, but with thrush, it would normally have been preempted with something. So it might be that you've been on antibiotics, or that you have a disposition to thrush. It doesn't normally just happen all on its own. So it is. If working on the positioning attachment doesn't make it better, it might be worth revisiting thrush.
And your baby will have white spots in its mouth. It'll be like sort of cottage cheese in its mouth a little bit. So, you'll see that as well. Pink and shiny as well, quite often.
Yeah.
Your breasts are pink and shiny, just where the mouth's been, if there's thrush there.
So I hope that gets better and better, Rebecca, because you've obviously done such a brilliant job to get this far, so well done you. Robin has said, do I need to harvest colostrum prior to birth? Apologies if silly question first baby. No silly questions. We should have said that at the beginning. There are no silly questions. Well, I think you've just covered it a moment ago, haven't you? And said you don't have to. It's good to learn the skill, but you don't have to. Again, we keep plugging our videos, and don't laugh because they're not fantastic videos, but they do give information.
Embarrassingly awful.
Yes, certainly no. As we've said,
the information is there.
The information is there. No Oscars. We thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. Here we go with the drilling again. It's a very good skill to have before you have your baby, but you don't have to do it. So just learn the skill, but don't need to feel that you have to collect it, unless you have a risk factor. factor. Naomi already mentioned that earlier. You know, if you know you're going to be having a baby and it's going to be a bit premature, they're forecasting your baby's going to be a bit small for dates, or you're a mother who has diabetes. If you're any of those things, then we would be considering that, you know, it would be well worth you expressing and collecting in the antenatal period. Other than that, it would just great to know how to do it, to have that skill before you have your baby, because when you have your baby, you will be very tired. And it's really hard to learn a new skill when you're tired. So by all means, learn the skill, and then, you know, if you need to, collect it, and if you don't, no need.
And the reason we say if you've got a risk factor is that if you can get lots of colostrum to support you with hand expressing after you've had your baby as well, the chances of giving formula to your baby are reduced, so that you know, your baby gets more calories in the early days when we're watching its blood sugars, because we would be checking its blood sugars in the first few days. You've got a little bit extra to give your baby, so it's not. That's the reason why, is that you've got backup. You still do the hand expressing and give your baby food and feed it in the normal way, but it reduces the chances of your baby being given anything other than your milk.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because your baby sometimes needs extra calories if they've got you know, those risk factors that we've talked about, and that's what we're protecting you from, so that you're not having to go and get extra food for your baby.
And whilst donated breast milk is absolutely fantastic, and I think we're the only unit in the UK that are actually making it available on the wards. So most other places it's only available on the neonatal unit.
Sick babies.
From that point of view, we're very lucky to have it. Your milk is still better.
Yeah.
Your milk, your body knows how old your baby is, when your baby was born. If it was premature, your body knows your baby was premature and changes the composition of the milk. The milk that is being donated, which we're so grateful for because it keeps human milk exclusivity, that baby may be 5 months, 6 months of age, and the needs of that baby is very different to your baby. So wherever possible, it's your milk first and foremost every time. So having a supply, if there's any risks, is always useful.
And you've also got to remember that the mum that's giving you that milk is pumped 8 times a day to give it. You know, she's not it's not on a supermarket shelf.
No.
It's not just available freely. It's pumped with love from another mum.
Yeah.
And she's perhaps pumped because she had she needed some for her baby that might have been sick, and then she wants to give back. But she's worked really, really, really hard to give you the opportunity to have that breast milk. It is not something that comes from a supermarket. So, you know, it's very, very special and very, very precious, and it should be used very, very sparingly, and only when it's medically needed. It's not something that is a go-to, and it's not freely available for you if your baby's normal, and also it's not freely available for you to take home afterwards either. So, you know, you don't get given it to take home when you've had your baby if your feeding's not quite right. So it is a very, very, very precious commodity that is only available to mothers in Oxfordshire on the postnatal wards, nowhere else. So, you know, we are so, so lucky that we have that system in place. But it should be used as gold dust, you know, because it is absolutely liquid gold and it's a gift.
Well, it retails at £150 per litre.
Yeah.
If you were to sell it.
Yeah.
So this
That's
is why
how much we sell it to other hospitals for.
So this is why, if you are, you know, if it's being made available to you for, you know, good reason, we do expect you to express as well. You need to do your part too.
Yeah.
This links in quite nicely to the next one as well. Ellie has said, is it a good idea to kickstart milk supply before the baby is born? We'll come back to that because we have covered that to some extent. If so, how can I do this? Currently 34 weeks, first time mum, unsure of when to expect colostrum or milk to come in. Obstetrician has warned me that I may be offered an induction if my baby's still growing poorly. So I want to be prepared as possible if I'm having an early birth. Many thanks. So that covers lots of stuff on there. So I think we've talked about milk production, so learning the skill and the fact that your baby you might have to have an induction because your baby's not growing as fast as we would hope. Then that would be a reason to collect it, as far as I'm concerned. We would not be recommending you're doing this at 34 weeks. We would say have a go at 36 just for the practice and collect from 37. So if you go on our website, so if you go onto OUH hospital website and go on to maternity and then on to feeding, we have a leaflet about collecting colostrum when you're pregnant. So there's a whole leaflet about it and the reasons why you might want to do it, and step by step how to do it. So that would be, well worth you having a look at.
If you're having an induction at 34 weeks, it might be that while you're in the waiting to have your baby, that you can do a little bit of collecting if you've, if you're less than 37 weeks. So if you're imminently going to be delivered, then you could probably do some while you're in hospital the day you're having your baby, or if you're having an induction for any reason, the day that you have your induction, you could probably do some collection of colostrum then, but we wouldn't recommend that you do it before 37 weeks any other time.
And the other thing to take into, you talked about kickstarting your milk production before the baby's born. As I mentioned earlier, anything you do before the baby is born does not have an impact on your milk supply. It's only what you do after the baby is born. You have colostrum in your breast, it's present from sort of
16 weeks.
Yeah, exactly, 16 weeks. Women often start seeing in the mid-trimester, in the middle trimester, they often start seeing it. Might see a stain on their bras, and your milk will come in somewhere between days 3 and 5 after you've had your baby. It's linked to you delivering your placenta. So we call it lactogenesis 1, that's you producing colostrum. That goes through until 3 to 5 days after you've had your baby, and then you go into lactogenesis 2, and that's when your mature milk comes in. And it only comes in because you have delivered your placenta.
It's about the hormones that drop once you've had your placenta, and the other hormones rise, and they create the stimulation to make milk.
So anything
it won't happen if you have got a placenta in, and indeed if you don't have your placenta removed properly, women sometimes don't produce enough milk because they've still got placenta there and the body still thinks it's pregnant. So it's not related to before and what you're doing.
So the kickstart can only start happening once your baby's born. You can do lots once your baby's born, feeding and expressing, that will kickstart your production. Anything you do before is a bonus. And it may be well worth it if you're going to have your baby early. So, okay, Ellie, good luck with that. Sarah Jane has said, and she's a top fan apparently, her daughter's 3 weeks old and feeding brilliantly this morning, though she slept for 3 hours and hadn't been on my left breast for close on 5 hours. The pain was horrendous, and even having now fed from that side for an hour, it's still painful and hard down one side. What can I do to prevent this from happening again? Should I have expressed, and what can I do now to ease the pain? Tried heat. Try cold?
Do some pumping.
Yeah, get some milk removal going on. And just till you're comfortable, just take that redness, that heat out of it, and the fullness.
Massage. Electric toothbrush sometimes clears it as well if it's a little bit blocked. But that just shows you how easy it is to get mastitis just by missing one feed out. If your baby suddenly starts to sleep longer, it's very, very common that you suddenly get mastitis as a result of just 2 hours more. That's what does it, that the milk's not removed. So just take it off till you're comfy if it happens again. If you're just waiting for your baby to wake up, just go and take a tiny bit off till you're comfortable, and then it just eases that backlog of milk in your breast.
And the other thing you can do is we talk about responsive feeding, and responsive feeding is a two-way process. That means that it's not just your baby that asks for feed, you can offer feed. So a mum can say, like you have felt, I feel really full, pick your baby up. Most babies will quite happily have a feed even if they've been asleep. That's our part of being responsive as mums. So, you could maybe feed because you're feeling full. You could feed because you're feeling a bit low and you need a bit of an oxytocin boost. You want to cuddle with somebody. There's no reason why you can't do that. You're feeding for comfort, your baby feeds for comfort. There's no reason that you can't do that. That's what we mean by responsive feeding. It's not just the baby that has the power, you do too. So, if you if you are feeling like that, many babies will rouse and quite happily go on and use your baby to regulate the flow. But now that you're in that situation, maybe try, warmth gets it going, cool will calm it down, get the milk moving, and if it's still not responding, some ibuprofen would be good too if you can take it.
Frequently, so 3 times a day for about 2 or 3 days, and that will take the inflammation away.
If it isn't improving, then get some support. Talk to your GP, give us a call, and we need to get that milk moving. All right, good luck with that. Let me make sure I don't miss anybody. Nisa,
time, aren't we?
Oh, we are. We've run out. Nisa has said, "What's normal weight for 8 months, baby? She's on formula and solid foods. What's best food to gain weight?" Look at your red book. Go and have a look at your red book. We don't actually. So if you go onto the centile charts in your red book, your baby's red book, and have a look what line she's been following, and just track it up from the age and see she should be somewhere around that line. So that's what we're looking for. It's not exact science, but just go and have a quick peek, because it very much depends on what centile your baby has been tracking on. So, we have down at 0.4 and we have right up at 96. So, babies are so different and they'll grow at different rates. So it's as long as your baby's following more or less the line, that's all we need.
Check your health visitor if you need to get your baby weighed.
Yep. So see how you get on with that, look at that. And Lisa said thanks. And Sarah Jane said thank you as well. I think that's it, ladies. I think we've finished. Apologies if I've missed anyone's comment. I hope I haven't. I'm just flicking back up.
Lots of lovely questions.
Yeah,
It's
as
all been on a
always.
theme, really. We've done lots on expressing in early days, which is lovely, because that's basically what we came in to talk about today.
Yeah.
So you obviously sensed our mood.
We just want to stop you
we
coming
said,
back
"Stop it.
in.
We don't want you to come back." Indeed, we don't.
We want you to go
we don't
home.
want postnatal readmissions, but when we had 7 or 8 last week, it was just what's going on, So we just need to make sure that everybody takes that responsibility to feed
We've got
their
one more
babies.
question to nip through. Judith has said, is it best to buy a breast pump before the baby's born if you're hoping to breastfeed? Not necessarily. Not everybody needs a breast pump. And to be honest, you can get them on an overnight carrier. You can get a pump. You could even go out somewhere like Boots, especially now the shops are open. Places like John Lewis and Boots, they all sell pumps, so you can get a pump. And it's much more to do with how you use the pump than the pump that you buy. Just to say though, if you look at what's called the hacker, that's the silicone ones that you squish, and they encourage milk leakage. It is not a pump. They call them a pump, but it is not a pump. So that is not, they're not suitable if you're having to really express your milk. You'll be looking for maybe, something from Avent, or, there's so many different makes. Who else are the ones we look at? Medela, Ardo, Amida. There's lots of different makes out there that make some really good pumps, all available, so online and in many shops. It's much more how you use it than the pump.
And your midwives and your health visitors will often loan them out for a short period of time until you can get hold of one. So, people bring them back and borrow them and bring them back. So there's nearly always a run of pumps available. Occasionally they haven't got one to give you, and that can be tricky, but normally we can get hold of one somewhere. There's plenty of places. OBS is
OBS have got lots of pumps. They're very good.
Lady Cafe do them. So there's lots of places that you can get access to borrowing pumps for a short period of time, and then you can decide if you want to buy one after that. But no, don't buy one before, because it might not be the one that would suit you afterwards. You might find that you've used a different one and you prefer that.
And some people get on with hand pumps, and some people are absolutely brilliant at hand expressing and never need a pump. So it really is, they say, it's horses for courses. So don't rush out and buy a pump. Wait and see if you need one.
Very expensive.
Right, Nisa's come back and said thanks, and Tilly's just come back and said thank you so much for all the helpful info. Right, and I think that's us till next week. We are here again next week, and thank you very much for all your lovely questions and
your support ongoing.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.